At the start of this project, I was very overwhelmed with this assignment and didn't know where to start. I figured that talking to my organization would be the best starting point. After talking to Reese, a manager at Linville, about the project and what I needed for it, he told me that they had a plan, but it was not how I had how I had described it. I thought that this would be a good way segue into complications of this project and what I did to get past them. So problem one was that it took Linville 6 days to give me their um, their crisis plan, and it took this long because they wanted to review it and update it. By the time they sent it to me, I realized that to the 21 elements that they didn't have, they or out of the 21 elements that are supposed to be on a crisis plan, they only had one of those elements, and that element was the introduction. So their plan was 155 pages long, and it was really confusing, and it was hard to follow, and it was unrealistic that they would actually look at it in the event of a crisis. So I wanted to make a plan that was easier to read and was could actually be used in the event of a crisis. Problem two was that I didn't find out where the examples of these elements were until like the middle of the project. I was looking on page, I think it was like 150 or 315 that she said to reference, but couldn't find specific examples of some of the elements. But when I found Appendix B and C, I found that they were more helpful than the pages that she had told us to look over. Um, Problem three was formatting to fulfill the requirements of this assignment. It was um, it was time consuming and difficult, but my table of contents was constantly being changed because as I added information and formatted different elements, um, the page numbers would change. So I had to change the table of contents to to work with it. For my introduction at the beginning of the project, I based my information on what they had told me, what they had given me, and examples from the website because I couldn't find any examples in the book at the beginning. Um, I had So I included examples and answered the questions why the plan was important, what would happen if it wasn't followed, and if a similar crisis had happened, but there was no organization. But after I found an Appendix B or C, after I found the examples, it made it a lot easier to, um, it made the organization work better in my project. Um, when talking to my organization, I found that a workplace violence crisis is the most common type of crisis that they have to deal with. He told me a story about 2 years ago of two members who got into a physical altercation that resulted in one of them being severely injured, and the other was put into custody. And that person that was put into custody is not allowed to be back on Linville Ridge property without the parents' supervision. And he told me that in these situations, the manager is supposed to call the authorities immediately, followed by the security. And under the notifying public section, I go over the people who shared or who should be contacted in the event of a crisis. For the crisis team spokesperson, it was difficult to do this section because they don't really have a spokesperson or a crisis team. Their crisis team is basically PR representatives, and their spokesperson is the general manager. So in my under that section, I talk about the general manager and how he would report the details of the situation. As far as social media relations, Reese told me that normally these situations are handled internally and there's no need to let the public know because reputation is such a huge part of the country club. So normally it's handled internally and doesn't require media attention, but in the situation where someone is put into critical condition, or if there's an active shooter or something along those lines, then the authorities should be contacted, and then the security, and then Heather would be contacted, and Heather is in charge of relaying club information to all social media outlets. So notifying her in the event of a serious crisis would be the third step. After completing this 21-part project, I have a better understanding of the elements that make up a crisis plan, or that make a crisis plan more effective. And after looking at the differences between my 30-page plan and their 155-page plan, I can see the benefits of having a more straightforward plan. This project was time-consuming and difficult, but after completing this project, I can see that the time spent on it paid off, and what I learned can benefit a company's functionality. Another interesting takeaway from this project was being able to look at the procedures for what to do in certain situations at the place that I work at. Even though this project had many obstacles, it showed me how beneficial it can be to prepare for the worst. Thank you.